So I was watching my beloved Star Trek all week. And of course, it was another one of those time travel episodes. You know, the ones I'm talking about where they go back in time and there's a great deal of concern. If we change just one little thing, just the tiniest of things, we might not exist to come back and change that thing. It's the time paradox. You know what I'm talking about? You know these things, right? It's intriguing to me when you start thinking about those kinds of things, because time travel not only gives me a headache, but it also reminds me that we're all so concerned about changing the past. What if we change the past? What if something in the past gets changed by a time travel? You know, just one small thing and the future be changed. But we never think about the small things we're doing today. What if I do something today that changes the future? Wait, what? Even if I change that one small thing, would it really make that big of a difference? I'm starting to wonder if it really would. 500 plus years ago, Christopher Columbus stood before Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, who, by the way, for some reason in this story, get a pass, and I'm not really sure why that is, but we almost never discuss King Ferdinand and Isabella and their foibles in history, because they're the ones who funded Christopher Columbus's voyage to the new lands, to the new world. Of course, they weren't thinking they were going to the new world, as you might already know. They believed that sailing around the world would take them to the East Indies. It would be a shorter route. It would be less difficult to get to the spices of the West Indies, which, of course, you know, the spice must flow. And this is what they kind of believed around that era was the real situation there. Portugal over there in the right-hand side in the middle of the thing, and they thought that they could sail approximately a little bit further than they actually did and reach the Maldives, reach Malay. Now, there's some myths here about Columbus that we need to eradicate. Myth number one is that they all thought the world was flat. They did not think that the world was flat. They knew that the world was round. And indeed, this whole Earth was flat and we're going to fall off the edge of it thing was past the point of absurdity. I mean, it really was. There was nobody who actually believed that, except maybe some uneducated peasants somewhere who heard it from a guy on the radio. Well, not the radio, but, you know, down at the tavern or whatever. And really never put the thought into it that it required to defeat a simple geometry equation to figure out that the Earth was actually round. They always knew that it was round. What they didn't know was how big it was. They should have, but they didn't. He always believed the world was round, and he really had an understanding that he was going to make it to the East Indies, without much of difficulty, because it was a straight line shot. There was nothing between here and there, according to their thinking in that era, and according to their maps in that era. And so it was actually with some surprise that Columbus landed in the New World, that he landed on these islands full of these indigenous peoples who were not Christians. They weren't. And because they weren't Christians, well, God must have sent me here for the sole purpose of converting these people while, you know, taking advantage of their wealth and their resources for myself. The interesting thing about Columbus is that over the years, he actually made 4 voyages to the New World, including one in which he made it as far as Mexico, Central America, and Panama. But it's that time period between those voyages that is particularly intriguing about Columbus, and it's where a lot of the discussion about Columbus, and particularly Indigenous Peoples Day, comes from. After his first and second and third voyages, Columbus was made a governor of these new lands by the Portuguese crown. He was made a governor, and he was given authority in these areas, and he was told, to rule these areas with respect and that sort of thing. And he was later accused of not doing that. He was accused of being a tyrant. A lot of people don't realize this. A lot of people don't know this. He was accused of being tyrannical in his governmenting. He was accused of being cruel, of assassinating people, of punishing people who, didn't believe in God the way that he wanted them to believe in. And indeed, from the time he landed in the New World till the time he arrived on his third voyage, there was a lot of... Columbus was not well regarded in his own community. What's the proverb about a prophet is only loved in his hometown or whatever, something along those lines? Well, obviously Portugal is not Columbus's, it's not his hometown, but neither is Spain. And eventually Spain ends up taking over all of this stuff, and Columbus continues to work for the Spaniards. You have this period of cooperation, I guess is what they call it, between Portugal and Spain, where they essentially become one. I don't want to get into politics, this whole thing. Bottom line is, Columbus is not well liked by his fellow governors in the New World. In fact, he shipwrecked on his third voyage and he sends some of his men in a canoe to one of the other islands to ask for help, and the governor basically tells him to, in Spanish, I'm sure, bleep off. And helping you? What are you, insane? He eventually manages to free himself from this predicament. He shows up at the other place, and they promptly clamp him in irons. They arrest him and ship him back to Spain, where he is imprisoned for a period of time, not very long, at which point he manages to convince King Ferdinand that, look, I'm not the bad guy here. I didn't do anything wrong. What's the problem here? And the Spaniards, of course, let him out. King Ferdinand says, okay, isn't it time for you to make one more voyage to the New World? And he says, sure. And off he goes to the new lands, where, again, he is not well regarded by his fellow Spaniards, I think I said Portuguese earlier in the show. I don't know why I said that. Spaniards. Spain. Ferdinand and Isabella are from Spain, not Portugal. Anyway, he comes back. He comes back after this fourth voyage, and he never really reaps the benefits of his voyages. He never really gets the pat on the back that he thinks he deserves. In fact, towards the end of his life, he becomes more and more religious, but in a strange way. He becomes very fervent about the fact that his entire purpose for going to the New World, his entire reason for discovering the New World, was to convert non-believers to Christianity, specifically Catholicism, and bring new believers into the church. He writes 2 books with the help of his friend who is a priest. One of the books is basically a list of what he thinks he's owed by the Spanish crown for his services to the Spanish crown, which he apparently has not yet received. All riches and wealth and titles and lands, all these things that he thinks his prodigy should get because look what I did for you. He also writes another one about, why I did what I did, which again, he reiterates, I did this for God. It was God that led me to the new lands to convert them and bring the word of the church to these folks. But the legacy of Christopher Columbus, while in my generation was, basically golden, has become tarnished in the ensuing 538 years, hasn't it? Nowadays, it's all about abolish Columbus Day. There's nothing to celebrate. Christian terrorism begins in 1492. White racists go back to Europe. Anti-colonial resistance and so forth and so on. And the question you end up asking yourself is, what happened? I mean, I will grant you that Christopher Columbus was not well regarded by his own folks in his own time, but he did something that no one else had ever done, or at least lived to tell about, or at least bothered to write about and come back and wave the flag and say, hey, look, I'm back. Here I am. Look what I accomplished for you. Look what I got for you. It's like the scene in Coneheads when Beldar goes back before the Grand Poobah there, and he's like, what did you bring me? A tire iron? Sort of thing. Yes, Columbus is not the first one to discover the New World. We get that. But he is the first one to permanently connect the New and the Old worlds together. He's the first one to really make a case for colonization and those sorts of things. Prior to that, it had just sort of been hit and miss. In fact, so hit and miss, we have no idea if some of the evidence indicating pre-Columbian contact is real or not. They didn't bother to write it down. They didn't bother to record it. None of those things. But this history has become rewritten. It has started to be re-evaluated. It started to be complained about, particularly in recent years, and most particularly this year, with what's been going on, as portraying Columbus himself as the fountainhead of racism, the fountainhead of all of the problems that the New World has had. And here's the question that I have. If Columbus had never existed, if Christopher Columbus had never been born, what would be different today? Now, you might say to me, well, colonialism wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have the racism problems. He wouldn't have wiped out the indigenous races. Dave, you've talked yourself about some of these islands where like Jamaica, where the indigenous population was annihilated and had to be replaced with slaves from Africa and so forth and so on. Do you really think that if Christopher Columbus had not sailed the ocean blue in 1492, that those things would not have happened? There is no linear progression from Columbus to Magellan to the Nautilus to whatever. The fact of the matter is that there would have been many other people, many other men, who were willing to strap themselves into small, tiny ships. You can barely call them ships. They're so small. They're more like boats. And sail them across the wild Atlantic Ocean, and would have eventually found the New World anyway. In fact, we know for a fact that it had already happened in some places. We also understand that there is a philosophical problem here that did not start with Columbus. Columbus was simply a tool. Whether you want to say he was a tool of the Catholic Church or European dominant, whatever you want to classify that as, he was already well steeped in a tradition that functioned the way that it did. And to get to that, you got to go all the way back to Ionia. You got to go all the way back to Pythagoras, as we talked about the other day. And this Ionian versus Pythagorean theory philosophy. You have to go into science versus mysticism. Now, believe it or not, Pythagoras, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, was firmly on the side of mysticism. He was firmly on the side of slavery and using the gods as excuses for behaviors that we now consider to be inappropriate. It wasn't Western European philosophy, for God's sakes, it was Greek philosophy as espoused by Pythagoras. Ionian philosophy was much more scientific. It was much more questioning. Gee, I wonder what's on the other side of that ocean. I wonder how far I can go. I wonder how I can steer. I wonder how I can reach other places. As Carl Sagan once said, once you're open to questioning time-honored rituals and practices, you find that one question leads to another. Where am I? Columbus may well have asked. I'm not where I thought I was going to be, so where exactly am I? How do I get back? What can I discover here? What is there here because of my traditions and my philosophies that are well ingrained in me and in my religion and in my practices and in my culture? What is there here that I can enslave? What is there here that I can dominate, rule, take over? And while it's easy to say, well, we need to abolish Columbus Day because it's representative of this, it misses the whole point of the fact that this has been going on for a lot longer than Columbus. This has been going on literally since the era of Pythagoras, who rationalized the behaviors that we now consider to be outrageous, which led to the behaviors of explorers and great men who did things that were kind of in the Ionian tradition of let's push beyond the boundaries, but at the same time they carried with them the philosophy that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We're stronger, we're better, therefore you are our slaves. It wasn't as much that Columbus sailed across the ocean in 1492 and said, I am here to make you believe in my version of God. I am here to make you slaves to the Spanish crown. That was already ingrained in almost all of society because the Pythagoreans won the debate thousands of years before that. Because the Ionians' questioning of authority was seen as a threat, was seen as problematic. And while mankind has always had that adventuresome, that willingness to go beyond the horizon, we've also always taken with us our culture and our moralities and our ethics, which weren't necessarily Columbus's. This is why I say to you, all this nonsense about abolishing Columbus Day is exactly that. These are folks who do not understand philosophy, metaphysics. They don't understand history. And the absolute reality that if Christopher Columbus had never slipped away from the pier, sailed across the ocean in 1492, somebody else would have done it too. Somebody else would have done it too anyway. Nothing would be different today at all. Even the changing of that small thing wouldn't have mattered. There would have been other men who came to the new lands with the same philosophies, the same ideas. And maybe instead of Columbus Day, we would have, I don't know, some other guy's name day that we could argue about that. Which means that we're just arguing about a singular person rather than the ideas behind it. And that may be our real problem, huh? It may be that we need to learn about that. Philosophies, we need to understand, we need to question the time-honored rituals, the time-honored things that we've held, as opposed to simply saying, we hate Columbus, and you can't call it Columbus Day anymore.